Hello. So we are very happy to welcome you for this first talk during our exhibition Les Fleurs d'Yves Saint Laurent. This talk is gathering Sam Falls and Jérôme Sans. Sam is our guest artist of the show. So thank you, Sam, for being here.
Merci.
You can discover two of his pieces in the show, at the first flower and in the second flower. And I'm very
interesting the way you say that, because it's flower, almost like the relationship with the issue of today. Yeah. First flower and second flower.
Ah, yeah.
Yes.
Et sans compter la farine qui se dit.
Wheat.
Wheat. And flower.
And flower.
Flower. And I'm very happy also to welcome Jérôme Sans. Jérôme Sans will introduce himself later, but Jérôme is an artistic director. He was also the co-founder of Le Palais Tokyo, who is opening his show tonight, so it's very close if you want to attend it later. And Sam and Jérôme worked together for several years. They did a first show, a group show in Germany at the Museum Frieder Burda in Baden-Baden, which is still on.
Yes.
And you are both also working on a solo show of Sam, which will take place next year at the Cookie Factory in Denver.
In Denver, exactly, Colorado.
And as for me, I'm Elsa Janssen. I have been the director of the museum since 2022. And since I'm here, I had the chance to curate 4 exhibitions. And it's for each exhibition, we invite fine art artists. It's very important. Inviting fine art artists is it's a huge challenge for us, because it's a way to have a look to our collection from a very contemporary way. And it's also a way to make dialogue and with artists and highlight the fact that Yves Saint Laurent still share some inspirations with today's artists, and of course it's a way to show how timeless is his work. So with Olivier Saillard and Gaël Mamine, the two curators of the show, we chose to invite Sam to be part of the show because his work dialogue perfectly with Yves Saint Laurent's universe. Looking at Yves Saint Laurent's universe makes me think of many artists. It's a chance to look at it. And of course, one conversation which strikes me, and you can have some images here, was the link between Sam Falls' work and Yves Saint Laurent. Why? Because obviously they share many inspirations and topics. First of all, of course, nature and flowers as a key subject in their work, but also the sense of colors. And thanks to their work, we can also realize how they make nature eternal, and I think it's a key also subject through the work of Yves Saint Laurent and yours. And we won't talk about this, but it's amazing how when I made some searches on, of course, Sam, but Yves Saint Laurent, I have noticed so many common points, notably that you worked on very various mediums. So did Yves Saint Laurent, because of course you know that Yves Saint Laurent was a great drawer, and also he he did fashion design, but also stage, performing arts. And so, yeah, it was amazing to note how, yeah, you share so many common points. So now I let Jérôme have his lovely conversation with Sam.
Thank you, Elsa. What a pleasure to be with you today in Yves Saint Laurent house. A house that is inhabited today with nature. And you know that what is specific with Saint Food that is known for integrating nature in its creative process. He sprinkles pigment around plant life that he exposes to atmospheric moisture, sunshine and rain. Nomadic in his practice, the American artist works mostly outdoors, which is quite rare. You know, his studio is not inside, not in a loft, but he goes to nature, the land is his own studio. And particularly in national forests, where he went recently with someone in the assembly here, with Andrew. He went in Colorado, it's amazing forest. I wish I was with you guys. In a seemingly minimalist tradition, Sam Falls removes his hand, his gesture from his paintings, as you understand, because the nature makes the work. You know, he has changed somehow the history of contemporary art. Before, it's a machine that became the work, and no more traces of the hand. That was history of the avant-garde towards minimalist tradition and conceptual art. So he reset that history to a new one, where the gesture is made by nature. So it challenges this imposing and fixed tradition of contemporary art with work based on evolution and unpredictability. Normally,
excusez-moi, monsieur, mais
vous en prie, jeune homme.
Je pense qu'on aurait pu parler français. Voilà, je comprends rien, je m'en vais.
C'est pas grave, mais mon ami ne parle pas français.
On est en France.
Très bien.
Moi, un traducteur.
C'est bien. Merci. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comment. So, but it's part of nature, you know.
Désolé.
Désolé, yes. The world is should be global, and everybody should be speaking English today anyway. So he lets, as you understand, nature hand takes the lead, both as an exhibition ode to life cycles and profoundly melancholic, between beauty and decay. His often large-scale works, as we have here upstairs, suggest the undeniable ephemerality of all things, capturing time's fleeting embrace. Deeply anchored in the place of their creation, his canvases and sculptural work become like geographical documents, marker of a specific land and time. You agree, no? So, in this exhibition, as you all know, your work, dear Sam, is put side by side with Yves Saint Laurent's universe and his use of flowers. You told us, that your mother has always painted flowers. She started by painting botanical flowers, if I'm not mistaken, on silk, and in the late 80s did textile design. How did this mother work influence you?
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Elsa, for having me. And so my mom, she's a very skilled artisan and was more on the craft-based side, painting botanicals. And I remember as a kid, like she just worked at our house in the basement and being 5 or 6 years old and trying to draw like her, or mimic that. And I was so frustrated, I kind of gave up art at an early age because I felt, I was better at other things. I studied math and science all the way into university and halfway through there, but I also started studying photography. But in a way, I grew up surrounded by nature in a forest, and I did do a lot of camping activities like this, but in a way I always was more on the punk side of there and wanting to get away, live in a city. And even when I switched over to studying photography, it was a way to use mechanical reproduction. And then I was doing kind of conceptual work, beginning with the sunlight and working outdoors through the sun, and eventually I was in visiting my mom again in Vermont, and having worked outdoors in California with the sun, and then we were there for almost a month, and I was working on a show for Eva Pressenhuber, and I had a deadline coming up, and there's no art stores or anything around, so I began by getting drop cloths, like the canvas painter's cloth from the hardware store in our town, and then I knew I wanted to work with the rain, but usually if you're dyeing fabric, it's a heat-based process in baths. So to create the image, I needed a cold water reactive dye, which turns out to be the same pigment my mom uses. So I could just take from there, from her studio, and I worked out in the farmland where I grew up, and that was the beginning of it. And of course, my mom was like, I knew you would one day come back to be influenced by me, and I never saw it coming. But yeah.
And the relationship with fabric and textile.
Yeah, that's true too. And I remember like one of the biggest things in our house was always this giant steamer where she would set the dyes in this old school like rocket ship looking thing. And she used the airbrush, and all of these fabrics were always around, and I'd go to the stores with her, and we'd travel to California to buy these silks. But it was one of those things like language, how it seeps into you. I happened to know a lot about it before I cared about it, and then it, just grew on me.
And many people wonder what kind of material you put outside, because with the moisture, with all the animals, the ants, what kind of thing can extract, the humidity and everything, and without destroying the texture of the material itself.
Yeah. In the beginning, especially when I started working as an artist outdoors, I was looking for resilient fabrics. And coming from photography, my idea was to still use light and exposure, but untreated work, like no photochemicals or anything like this. And in the beginning, I made these first works using car tires that I collected around Los Angeles because they had this dual abstraction, leaving the shadow of a perfect circle, but also because of their life-size scale, you recognize immediately it's a car tire. And to match that with the substrate, I started using polyester and vinyl, because not only was it resilient, but it matched this kind of rubber and non-decomposing substrate. And then I was working in Joshua Tree with the rocks and putting them on fabric, so I started using a more even stronger, like double woven linen that was organic to be left in the national park for a year. And so I didn't want any chemicals, off-gassing or whatever. And I started using natural dyes at that point. And from there it grew into experimenting kind of with every new subject matter with a different substrate. So it was kind of my 10,000 hours of learning the materials and what accepts the dyes and is kind of open to this influence of nature, because not everything is. And in a way, it's the reverse of painting also, because I'm looking for something that's very raw, no gesso, nothing, like unprepared to accept it.
And it's very amazing to look at yourself when you go in nature, lay down your canvas and you pick some flowers, some plants, and it's kind of a choreography you have with nature, selecting things where I am myself totally lost for what is choosing this one and not another one.
Yeah.
It's really unbelievable. And then you put them on the canvas, you, like a magician, you throw the pigment on the canvas, and then he leaves. And then it's like a photographic in a laboratory. You come one day, 2 days later, and then the magical thing appears.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, having studied photography, what really got me into art in general through photography was the magic of the darkroom. And even though you take the picture on film, until you process the film and then expose it again on paper, you're not sure what it'll be, and it can always have a light leak, these kind of experimental elements of chance. And so the work I do now is similar, where I don't know, and it depends now, instead of the weather. I mean, the cameras too, you are dealing with the sun and time, and so I've always wanted to keep that as an inherent conceptual element of the work, and it can shift through different areas, and that is kind of the driving force in what I do, is to never have it be decided upon exactly what it will be. Like, I always felt if you could write an essay, you should write an essay, you know, and if it requires visual presentation because you can't write an essay, then you should make art out of it. Yeah.
But it's nature that decides at the end what happens, because
Yeah.
a wind, I saw one day a wind moved everything on the canvas, so you can decide, but in fact nature is like a lesson to all of us. Like, you cannot force nature to do anything. Nature will always be the force.
Yeah, and I think nature too is the universal kind of way into my art, and I always wanted it to be very universal and open, and by leaving it open to nature's collaboration in the aesthetic of the work, it also leaves it open to every viewer's ability to enter the work from their own perspective, and removing my hand, and the more I can make room for nature's influence on the work, I think it's always gets better, because everyone has their own experience with nature and recognizes it.
And it's a living canvas, because you cannot force anything.
Yeah, no. Like, I'm thinking right now of this work I made recently where a bird flew into the window of our house and it died. And so I used it on the painting and to make an image of the bird. And then the next day when I went back after exposing it to the rain, there were all these animal tracks and the bird was gone. And I didn't see that coming, but of course it happened, and so there's always new things.
Yes. You work with accidents.
Yeah, or accidents happen to me.
Exactly.
Or to the art, yeah.
While you work in different forests, national parks, as you did recently again in Colorado, in different seasons and periods, your work is like a form of cartography of a time and territory. What does site specificity mean to you?
Mm-hmm. Site specificity is very important to me. And I think, with photography, my frustration and why I kind of abandoned it was that no matter how grand a picture you took or how gnarly, you could take a picture of a car crash or Yosemite National Park, and both of them are flattened and put onto paper and put into a frame, and the distance just grows with every part of the process. And so I really wanted to have the work come from a place, and not the same place, not my studio, but really come from a place and translate that place and time to the viewer immediately as a primary source without all the intervention of mechanical reproduction. And so that was built into it in what I started, like in Los Angeles, when we moved there, just being amazed by tires everywhere, cars everywhere. And then going back to Vermont, I used just these ferns for the first works like this that had taken over our whole farm, and they were iconic to my childhood. And then we got back to LA eventually, and there had been a storm and all of these palm fronds had fallen, and they, mimic the shape, but a much bigger plant than the ferns. But that was when I noticed this reciprocation of the places, and it was a conceptual thing in the beginning that then translated itself much more into traveling in the environment and national forests, and through the art really bonded me to environmentalism in a way, rather than coming to it originally. It's grown with me.
How do you choose the location in which you intervene? Because it's really an intervention when you go somewhere and you lay down this canvas on the floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the first one was by necessity, being at my mom's house. Those were really the first works I made like this, and then in California at our house, and then I started traveling to have more of traveling to different little parks that were starting to be decommissioned as protected areas, and so really actually making a picture that kind of preserved a place that may be disappearing, and then that grew into national forests. And I did this project with the Museum in Los Angeles, where I went to every national park in California. And you know, it involves research, what kind of plants are native to this area or iconic of the area to represent the place. And then also the weather makes such a different picture, from the desert to the mountains to the sea. And then after that, I was like, well, where do I go now? And so I started doing like snorkeling and diving for seaweed and working on the coasts of the Pacific Ocean. Then, you know, it just grows like this.
Do you see your work as creating a type of a large map of the world? Because bringing all those different sites, progressively from one to another one.
Yeah, for me it is, and I don't think it's like a necessary element of the work, but as it grows it becomes just a byproduct, and I think that that's really interesting. Like, I don't have a goal to, well, I did, you know, I've done several trips cross country, like I have that goal, and then now it is expanding. So maybe it will become this, like, should, I guess, yeah.
Your work is also like a map of time. What is your relationship? Because each time you capture one moment, which is not repeated. So what is your relationship with time?
I find I have an anxious relationship with time, you know, and especially I think it was always an amazement of linear time and a disbelief that it actually is true. And for me, time is bonded with death. Like, that to me is this one-to-one thing I can't ever detach. And then having children in the past decade has really heightened my emotional response to time. And I think there's these microcosms in nature. Like, I've worked a lot with the flowers and capturing their lifespan in these ceramic works I've been doing also. And just this constant awareness of death that seems to be a melancholy. Like, it's sublime, it's very beautiful. Like, the more you deal with it, the, you know, it's a strong emotional attachment I have to it. It's not sadness, it's melancholy, you know.
Your work, as I said earlier, deals with accidents, and I love that a lot. Unlike the art that came before you, where everything had to be controlled, fixed in the manner of the minimalist tradition, as I said earlier again. Here you don't force nature to play by rules, you play by nature's rules, you reverse. How do you see this shift? And what do these accidents mean for you in your work?
Yeah, to me it's like, in the very beginning, before I had these kind of larger deadlines, there was not only accidents, but disappearing works. You know, I would hike and leave works for a year, and sometimes they would be there, sometimes they wouldn't be there anymore, and I really liked that, like the purity of the process being my own and about the experience. And then as it's grown, you know, I accept the fact that I can't control nature, and the more I open to it, the better it is, like I was saying before. And even like that hammer project where I was traveling to all the national parks, you know, I would drive 2 days to a national park with enough supplies to make one painting, and then it would be 40-mile-per-hour winds in the Sierra Mountains, and I couldn't use these little wildflowers I had picked. They were just blowing off the canvas, so I had to use fallen branches and trees, and it really dictates the aesthetic of the work from the very beginning, and you know, I welcome it.
You belong to a tradition of artists who work outside, from the plein air, as we say in French, tradition of impressionists, all the way to land art of the 60s, like Robert Smithson or Richard Long. What does working outside today mean to you today?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and there is this huge tradition always, I mean, especially in France, like from Van Gogh to Monet, like the water lilies, and you can feel it, I think, when even a classic painting was made outdoors. And then, of course, the land art movement. Smithson's work, for me, was the most influential, the site, non-site. And this idea to have a primary source that was made outdoors and brought in. And I think my generation especially, I had this kind of perverse attachment to the studio. Like when I was living in New York, and part of the reason I moved to Los Angeles, and it was at the height too of video art and then internet art. And I think, you know, again, it wasn't something I felt galvanized about in the very beginning, but the more I've done it, the more I feel like it's really necessary these days to have work that's made outside the studio.
To reconnect with nature?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I go somewhere new almost every day to make work, and it's a big part of the way I approach. Like, I have gotten to a point where I can't imagine working in a studio. Not that it's bad, but it's not, you know, always the best place for new ideas.
But it's quite fascinating to see this gentleman in the landscape working with a very big insurance. Me, I'm totally lost. I'm a totally urban, mineral person. I don't understand anything with nature. Nature is just an abstract field where I don't know which plants, which names, which trees, where my grandfather knew everything and he could cure himself with plants and things like that. We have lost everything with that. The problem we live today is we became so proud to be contemporary, so proud to be inventive, that we forgot the main thing, nature. And what I love in this work is this reconnection without abandoning the city. How we can live together better today with nature and the city. And I am totally fascinated with your way of activating and behaving with nature. How it's so fluid. And Andrew was explaining me a few times when you were in Colorado with him how you were working as a magician somehow with nature and the plants. Who are your big influence in this kind of art field or land art that are really shaped your vision and your practice? Besides the names I just mentioned, is there any other person that are totally instrumental for your practice?
Yeah, like Robert Adams, the photographer, and also like Bruce Nauman, later Bruce Nauman, New Mexico Bruce Nauman, Agnes Martin. Even though they might have been working inside, you see the pictures, they're very connected, you know, all the way through that, like George O'Keeffe, the landscape tradition in a lot of ways, even though it may have been working indoors, it was more on site. I don't know who else, let's see. I mean, you know, Fischli and Weiss were really big for me, you know, the Rat and Bear videos. Mm. They were huge for me.
As we saw upstairs, one of the paintings you have in your show, Elsa, in your creative process, you involve the body here. Seeing your work is like a dance, as I said earlier, with painting, dance with nature, dance with the elements, going beyond the traditional way of painting. What does this bodily involvement mean to you?
Yeah, the figure has come in more recently into my work. As I was studying, like I've always been interested in the symbolism as I've done more work outdoors with plants, especially like from the Victorian era to the French symbolist works. And, you know, I think historically the plants had such more of a, you know, not always a religious symbolism even, but a romantic symbolism. And something, I had this book on Botticelli's Primavera where it listed the type of plant in each area and what it symbolized. And I kind of stopped there for a while, and then I was looking at the book, and of course all the figures, their positioning, you know, has symbolism too, and I wanted to incorporate that. And really it started during the beginning of COVID and this lockdown of working. I was working in our garden and not traveling in search of new national forests or outdoor areas to work, and so as I tightened that up, I started using my family as figures in the paintings and focusing too on the like Matisse and those drawings of the figure and how that can connect not only to the symbolic elements of the plants, but you know, it was always hand in hand.
When I saw you in Baden-Baden, I remember the movie of Hans Namuth shooting Jackson Pollock when he was making his painting. And I saw that, when I saw you, I had this impression of being myself, Hans Namuth, looking at you. So I felt this kind of connection, really like a dance, trance somehow, of you with nature, with your work. Very impressive.
Thanks. I mean, it is very similar outside on the ground. Sometimes it is like a ballet, like I wish.
Very physical.
Yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe Aaron's looking at me out the window, but no one is. But it can be very elegant.
Yeah. But
if I don't say so myself.
It's kind of you dialoguing with nature. It's not just someone dancing with music, with listening to this electronic music. No, it's really like dialoguing with nature and the plant and the location.
Yeah, it is very physical, and I do think on that end, like I have a very unique, I've thought about this, how I have a very strange connection to plants now because I'm so, you know, touching them, feeling them, what plants will work for, because not all plants do, and then making them one-dimensional step by step and reconstructing them. It's like, you know, I don't think many people see plants in this aesthetic focused way that I've learned how to.
There is a shift in today in the way in which artists approach nature, with the growing concern of preservation facing the climate urgency. Artists are no longer approaching nature from afar, removed from it, like in the tradition of Romanticism or Impressionism, but are letting nature in, living with it. Today, in an increasingly urban world, we need to again relearn what nature signifies, what nature means. Again, not something abstract, but real. How do you think we live this co-presence with nature? What does nature mean to you today?
I agree with you. I think, you know, it's an important influence in something that is like, you know, you always feel better when you go for a walk, and I think like, it's hard to underestimate the power of nature, but somehow it has been. So yeah, I mean, it's so important. I don't know, it's the best. We need it, we need to take care of it. And I think like, you know, I don't want to be political on the nose with my work, but of course it's there, and I think just representing nature is important.
It's not political, but you're more poetical regarding this position, I would say.
Yeah.
We can delete the L and I, poetical.
Poetical. Yeah, that's nice.
So the next question was, do you consider your work as having an ecological message? For me, yes. I don't know for you.
Yeah.
But how do you see the role of an art in the midst of this climate crisis?
Yeah, I think...
Because we are all, like I just come back from the big Grand Palais. I'm very happy to see all this work, but we miss to talk about where we are. What are we living here? Where are we? In which world are we? We are not just in a nice, happy land. We are facing a lot of crises, politically speaking, ecologically speaking. I'm happy to be happy, but I'm happy as well to understand where I'm living. And your work is very beautifully take me back in a very smart, again poetical. I see you're writing poems with plants about the emergency of reconsidering the presence and the proximity with nature.
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously it's important, and I think it's a difficult, in the context of art, like, sometimes it seems like there's two types of art, where one is to like ignore, like revel in it to the point of ignoring the world, and the other is to use art as like its best tool to be honest. And I think that tradition has always been there, and like until you have Manet's diamond dust shoes, like you, or that was Warhol, just the shoes. And I think like it's this amazing structure to be honest with every level of society, but sometimes it ignores too much to make one end happy. And I think like just by using it as like the melancholy I was saying before, like it doesn't have to be aware of the climate crisis and be sad. Like it can, and the same as time, like just to acknowledge it and that we're all in it, and you know, together, see it.
I like the idea of being together. Your photographic work as well, because you don't just do painting, you as well do photography. In fact, you're still doing photography with real pictures. And you will show, or you have shown your photography at MEP, Maison Européenne de la Photographie, as you say, MIP in English. How do you see these photographs in the body of your work today? Because you make photos with painting. Do you make painting with your photo?
Yeah, I make, for a while, like when I started, there was this term in artist working with photography, which never sat, even that didn't sit well with me. And so I think it's very, like I'm hyper conscious of when to use it. So the works there, I'm using an expired, defunct Fuji film that was discontinued in 2012. So it already has its mortality built into the film itself. And then I'm photographing these flowers in spring at their birth. And then when they die, I use them to press them as fossils into the clay as a frame for the thing. So you have this encompassing structure of life and death. And so it's always an acknowledgement maybe of what's not there or not available in photography. It's always, I'm not undermining it, I love it. It's more just pointing out the absence of time as well, not just the documentation of it.
And you do as well, if I'm not mistaken, a kind of a diary, a journal of your work. It's rarely, you rarely show, or very few people have seen it. And I think we are going to show it maybe together soon. And I think it's very exciting because it's all those material that makes your universe, with the writing, the drawings, the photos, and the film, because you have as well a background of the film. And we were thinking that maybe it would be great to do maybe a documentary made about you. You know, you started to shoot recently.
A small one.
A small one, yes. So to bring you back to the notion of this picture, this motion picture about you, your practice, your world, and making maybe something very special, not just as a traditional documentary, but maybe in between documentary and artist film.
Yeah. It's cool. I mean, I think I've always just had it's not like what I do is an alchemy at all, so much as I try to remove myself as much as possible. So I don't like to, you know, be pictured so much, because I think, you know, these days there's too much of that with artists.
I know that you don't like that people are following you when you do your work and you ask to be by yourself. You don't want to show the kitchen, to make it to show the backstage of what is going on.
Yeah. 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 I think when you become an artist, it always seemed like a choice to be anonymous, and these days it's changing, and so I like the writer's approach of, you know, being absent. But for you, yeah, it's great to do it.
But your position is very interesting because, as you said, we are living in a time where everything has to be transparent. You have to show almost everything. There is no gray area. Everything has to be visible and shared immediately with everyone. And a lot of artists play that game to show between, during and after. And you want to keep that very private, very to yourself.
Yeah, yeah. To leave the space for everyone else when they see the work. Yeah.
My last question, and don't be sad, is going to be, how do you see the future?
Oh, well, you know, you have to be hopeful. I see the future as an inexhaustible kind of mountain to climb, that ideally we are lucky enough to just have the mountain itself, you know? You can't worry about it, but you have to, you know, stay on the trail and not trample over all the live plants while you go. I don't know, I try not to think about the future.
I love the sentence, stay on the trail. That's a beautiful ending. Thank you so much, Sam, for the discussion with you. I'm so happy. Thank you, Elsa. Thank you, the Museum of Saint Laurent.